there's a very personal and spiritual bent to the record, but if you weren't paying attention to the peripheral media information, a listener might not necessarily get these underlying messages. I'm wondering if that loss of intent might concern you.
Well, I'm not interested in the listener coming to the work and viewing it as a snippet of autobiography. So what is important to me is that the people come to the work and can in some ways open it up, that it can become relevant to their lives in some way. There's a substance to the work, but people needn't know the background to the work in terms of my motivation and to the main themes running throughout the work. They can work that out for themselves on whatever level they choose to approach it. So it's not crucial that this is related in the media in any way, other than it possibly draw people's interest to the work that might otherwise have passed it by.
You've said your interaction with the media generally results in half-truths at best.
Yeah.
So how is what you say on the actual record more truthful and honest by comparison?
To describe the work, to pin it down in any way, is only to, as I say, take a stab at it, because ultimately the essence of a work goes beyond my understanding of it. There is a piece of work has an inner life, and it goes beyond the creator's experience of the work. In that, I'm very much aware that the work comes through me and not from me. Now I give the work form and maybe dress it up in some kind of something of an autobiographical nature, because that's the way I respond to the emotional content of the work. I can only dress it up in my own experience. I can only relate it to my own experience, and therefore that's the way I approach the work. But nevertheless, there's something much greater than that at the essence of the work, should you desire to delve into it that far. So for me to pin it down in language, in terms of just speaking about it right now, is not really to do it justice.
You've said the material on the record derives from things like joy, darkness, humor. You've said divine intoxication as well. And I noticed that on most of your material, you steer clear of more base expression, things like sarcasm or hatred or revulsion. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how you deflect those instincts, or if they're ever even a temptation.
They don't really enter into that space when I'm working. Sometimes in my work there can be an underlying sense of anger, frustration, anxiety, but there's no room for sarcasm. There's very little room in most of my work for irony. I'm looking for something that has a greater clarity to it than that. But I hope the work reflects an emotional complexity, because for me it's important that the listener come to the work and find themselves in the work regardless of the state of mind they approach the work in. In other words, if I say that the album is celebratory in feel, I still believe that it's important to reflect the more shadowy aspects of human nature, as well as the positive aspects, to paint a full picture. Because I believe also that we don't experience one emotion, one pure emotion. Its opposite is always present, and it's surrounded by a whole complexity of emotions. And I think for a piece of work to be true, it has to reflect that complexity.
So you think compartmentalization is something that exists in music as well as emotion in terms of description?
To a degree. But I think that the stronger the work, the more complex it is emotionally. That it can embrace all emotion. I mean, I don't know how it defines sarcasm, but I don't think that necessarily would fall into would necessarily be a part of that emotional complexity we're talking about, because that would stem from another source. To be sarcastic would would be to have negative feelings that are more deep-rooted. And if we get down to the root, we may find hatred or fear or any of the more basic emotions at the root of it. And I think there's room for all of that in music. I think there's room for the expression of fear. Hatred, maybe I tend to steer clear of that, but it's not something I do on an entirely conscious level. It's not something that I feel on a very powerful level, so therefore it doesn't come through in the work to a large degree, if at all, to be honest.
My understanding is that you have an open-ended approach to spirituality, but particularly based in Hinduism or other religions of the East. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious why you're still very attracted to metaphors that relate to heaven and hell in your work.
That's funny, isn't it? It's entirely to do with upbringing. And often I haven't been aware of it until after the composition is complete. I know there was greater references to heaven and hell and to devils and angels on Beehive than there are in later work. And I found that quite peculiar also. But I think it was entirely to do with background. And it surfaced in the work quite naturally. I think it is less apparent now than it was. But they're metaphors that can be used and aren't redundant in any way, regardless of my disciplines that embrace my life currently.
Can you encapsulate your upbringing from a religious perspective?
It wasn't. There wasn't a heavy religious influence in my upbringing, but it just being brought up in a Christian environment. I mean that in the loosest terms possible. In England, in the period that I was brought up, would be singing Christian hymns in schools. We'd have scripture lessons in which we study the Bible. I mean, this was all very much part of the curriculum. It wasn't a Christian school per se. It was just part of the national curriculum. So I just brought up with that kind of imagery, and we're all indoctrinated with that to some degree until it was thrown out of the curriculum some years later. After I left school. So I was brought up with these images. And Bible studies and all the rest of it is something that we had to go through, regardless of our own religious faith and beliefs.
That sort of upbringing was laden with a lot of guilt and suffering, mm-hmm. and I imagine that your escape probably freed you of a lot of that.
I think it did. There came a point relatively late in life, around 81, 83, where I began to question just about every aspect of my life, and so my belief, such as it was, came in for closer scrutiny, and I had a lot at that point, a greater sense of doubt in the kind of religious upbringing I'd been given and the kind of childlike faith I had, and I felt the pull of Buddhism appealed to me, I guess, because of the clarity of it. Particularly Zen Buddhism is what would ultimately appeal to me, because here was a discipline in which belief wasn't necessary. You followed a systematic set of rules in a sense, and it had that clarity to it that allowed me to embrace a discipline without necessarily embracing a doctrine per se. So later on in life, I was able to come to Hinduism and embrace aspects of that culture because I'd been through a period of Buddhist studies that freed me up from that the dogma of Christianity that I'd grown up with, and I was able to come back to a more devotional approach to my spiritual disciplines that didn't have that implied dogma, that was liberated, because it wasn't my background, my personal upbringing.
You've spoken a lot lately about the importance of your teachers to your well-being and to your music. And I'm wondering if you've ever considered that many people may perceive you as a teacher. In an age where there's a lack of spirituality, people turn to music, musicians and figureheads.
Sure. The music itself, as I said, has an inner life, and anything that comes through to the listener that is worthwhile and life-enhancing doesn't belong to me. That's the core essence of the work that's having its effect on the listener. I'm just a conduit, and so therefore, if people see me as being a teacher of any kind, I'm not entirely sure that's appropriate. I mean, I'm just one of the people that is pointing, to the way, maybe, possibly, just by pursuing a personal path. A possible path, but I don't suggest for one instance that people take note of my path, the one that I choose to take, or have an interest in the aspects of religion and spirituality that I do. It's it's not appropriate for me to be dogmatic about my own beliefs in any way. It's just that people have an interest in the work and they want to know what informs it, and so I speak about it. That's my only reason for doing so.
I did want to discuss your collaborative approach, and a colleague of yours once told me that you almost systematically alienate many of your collaborators, whether consciously or not, and he wasn't even criticizing you. He rather said it was just part of your creative process.
I see it happening, so I can't deny that it happens, but it doesn't happen in all instances. And there's many strange occurrences that I have no explanation for in terms of personal relationships when in the collaborative framework. And it's never been clear to me as why a person will respond to exactly the same phrase being spoken by myself and by somebody I'm working with. There's been clear instances where one person, if it's a group collaboration, one person will utter something to one of the musicians involved and they'll get no response. I will say exactly the same thing. I will reiterate what the person's just said, and I will get a hostile response. And that must be something to do with the way I project myself, with the way I express myself. It baffles me sometimes, and so people do respond to me in different ways, and I'm interested as much as anybody else to know why I get a certain response out of people. Not that it is always negative, obviously, but occasionally it can be. It can be I alienate the people, but not necessarily through what I'm saying, the specifics of what I'm saying, but maybe through the way I express it, or maybe it's more to do with the way that people view me, in that the same work's coming from myself as opposed to somebody else. It's how they view me that it influences how they hear what I'm saying. I really don't know. This is a difficult one for me to get to grips with.
What's an example of one of the phrases that you might use that one person might take positively and another negatively?
Oh, that would be difficult to pin down. I mean, it could be just giving somebody direction. And there being no criticism inherent in what I'm actually saying, but just giving somebody clear direction. One person will take it as a positive guide, and another might take it as an affront to their own creativity. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't be more specific than that, but the times that this has happened to me is numerous, and it may have more to do with personal relationships. It obviously does, than anything else.
My understanding is you don't have classic training when it comes to music theory. What's it like for you then to guide some of these astonishing virtuoso musicians? How do you relay what you're looking for to them then?
I guess I suppose I should say that with the majority of people I collaborate with, there is a mutual respect of some kind, and there's very rarely a problem involved with the creating of music. I mean, I think I could call up just about every collaborator I've worked with in the past 15 years and get a positive response to the call to come work. None of the relationships are damaged in that respect, with the possible exception of the Raintree Crow setup, the members of that. Having said that, when I'm arranging a piece of music, It's the composition itself or the arrangement itself that's crying out for a certain voice, and that voice is within my own frame of reference, obviously. So I'm making a connection between a body of work and a particular piece I'm working on. So it's a matter of inviting that musician in to see if they can also make that connection. So more often than not, there isn't need for a dialogue of some kind to establish the common ground. The common ground, in my mind, already exists, and I'm hoping that that the musician coming into to work with me can recognize that. And I have to say that 9 times out of 10 it works extremely well. There isn't a whole lot of need for dialogue. I tend to have more problems with contributions that aren't as major as the major collaborations that I have that people point to. It tends to be on a much smaller level, dealing with performances on one level or another, the timing of a drummer's performance, the pattern played on a bass guitar, very, very minor details. That's why I tend to butt heads with some of the musicians that I work with, but never to the degree that there's a major difficulty, because if I recognize I'm forcing a musician into working in a way that they feel uncomfortable, I just call an end to the session, and there is no animosity in that. Sometimes there's a certain amount of discomfort. They recognize that I'm unhappy with the work, but ultimately it's better that it end that way than take it a step further and push them into performing a piece in a way that they feel is uncomfortable, unnatural to them, and I'm not getting the work that I want because I'm not really getting the performance that I need. I'm getting somebody that's in some way resisting the work, and I can't work with that.
I spoke to Mick Karn fairly recently, and I thought I'd read you something he said. He said, "I do think that tension, as unbearable as it may be, does produce something that is stronger than the individual parts. I do think that when the four of us are together, there is something unique produced, and I'd like to see that happen again. Raintree Crow is a huge step away from the sound of Japan, and I'm really curious to see what the next step would be if we did get back together again." What's your reaction to that?
I agree with what he's saying. I mean, I agree with the fact that there is something unique when the four of us enter a musical relationship with one another. Something unique comes out of that relationship. My reasons for believing that is because we've grown with one another. We grow up with one another musically, and that means we have this common vocabulary, which is very rare. You rarely find this in a group of musicians unless it's an established group that's been working together for a long period of time. Now, as a solo artist, it's very difficult for me to reestablish that level of communication with musicians that I have only a relative familiarity with. I have a good grounding with Ryuichi, which is why I constantly work with him. We share a common vocabulary. This allows us to quickly reestablish the groundwork and move further and further afield when we're writing and arranging pieces together. That's wonderful. There's nothing worse than getting bogged down with trying to just establish that common ground with a musician, because that the final performance is going to isn't going to stretch beyond those boundaries because there isn't that mutual understanding. So when I'm working with a group of musicians like the Raintree Crow band, that we have that common ground already established, and therefore it's a matter of just shooting off from there in all different directions, and there's a wonderful sense of freedom in that, and of a shared common goal, if you like. And you really reestablish that in life. I have yet to reestablish that in life, except with a few individual musicians. I haven't found it within a group of musicians in the way that I have it with those boys. So, yes, when we get together in a room, something special will happen. Will it happen again? Do I desire that it happen again? What happened at the breakup of the Raintree Crow project and all the animosity that surfaced as a result of external pressures, which I view as being terribly misfortunate, it means that a trust was broken between myself and the other members of the band, although it's been reestablished to some degree with my brother again, as I knew it would be. to allow a musical relationship to truly flourish in the way that it did on the Ranger Crow project, there has to be a high level of trust. Mick placed a high level of trust in me as I was primarily producing the album. He gave me enormous freedom when asking him to adapt this or that style of playing or whatever he was doing. He placed enormous trust. Would he have the same amount of trust in me now? I don't know. And it's not because of anything musically that's happened. It's because of so much has been said, and a lot of it's come from Mick himself. Can it be reestablished? Can he open himself up to that level of trust again? And I don't know that he can. So it makes me question the reasons why we would be getting back together again. So I'm not sure we can ever set that up quite the same way as it was during the Ranger Crow project. The recording of the Ranger Crow album was completed without any animosity. In fact, with a great level of excitement, enthusiasm, love, and good humor. And so that's the true relation of the band, prior to external influences coming into play. We were talking at that time of going on to a second and third project and doing a tour, and I think that would have been absolutely wonderful. It didn't happen, and I'm not sure we can ever reestablish that trust again, but I try to remain open-minded to it.
Are you surprised that Mick has even made these overtures, that he would like to see this happen again?
Not really, because, we've known each other for so many years. It's family. You can have these big battles, and still remain family to some degree. But, we just have to see how things unfold in the future. It's certainly not something I'm thinking of right now, and I'm sure Mick doesn't dwell on it. It's just when asked, it's a matter of remaining open to the possibilities as they arise. And I try to feel the same way about it and feel that out. But I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, if at all.
I've watched your time spent filming it. I was very surprised at how revealing it was, as well as the fact that you chose to include these very personal family images. It's so much more than a standard electronic press kit.
I think that was the point. Virgin was doing the rounds asking different directors if they were interested in doing the project, and as always on these things, there's a terribly low budget. And so people have fair restrictions. If they're going to earn any money out of it, they got to keep things down to a very pretty simplistic piece. And Ingrid and I thought, well, why don't we just do it ourselves? We're not looking to earn anything out of it, and we'll just buy into a camera with the budget and put something together, and basically that's all we did. I wanted to do something that was based upon the family and our life together, purely because that's where this album was born out of that environment. And to focus on anything else would be untrue. Basically it would be trying to conceal just for the sake of privacy. And as much as I value my privacy, I felt it wouldn't hurt to open the doors a little, because we were in control of the material. So it was to allude to certain aspects of our lives together, the family life as it's presented, the spiritual life to the degree that it's touched upon, and to some kind of basic philosophical guidelines that underlie our life as it's lived together.
So I'm curious about some of the ideas about art and expression that you're planning to or are instilling in your children.
That's something that evolves over time for me, in terms of my relationship with my children. Whatever they're able to take on board at any point in time, however their interests develop over time. We have a 14-year-old boy who has a wonderful gift in the visual arts as a painter, as a sculptor. So we try and to help him focus on that aspect, that creative aspect of his own being, above any other interests that he might have. But at the same time, he's his own person. He has other interests, and of course, at that age, they're numerous, and a lot of them don't involve making the most of his abilities necessarily. But it's a matter of helping him focus to the best of his ability. And we've encouraged him. I've known him since he was 7. He's Ingrid's boy, and I've known him since he was 7. And at that age, he was very much into the whole video games and all of that. And his ability to draw and paint was undermined by the amount of time he would waste on other things such as the video games. And it influenced his vocabulary. It influenced the drawings that he did do, the few that he did do. And at that point we got involved with very spiritual teachers, and at one point we spoke about the fact that his art was being undermined by his interest in other aspects of entertainment and all the rest of it. And at a certain point he just decided to put all of that aside and to focus on his work again. And that was partly our influence and partly the influence of the environment that he found in when traveling with certain spiritual teachers. Now he's brought into that environment just because his parents have an interest in it. The two girls who are much younger, take it for granted that they're surrounded by people that have a spiritual belief of one kind or another, that lead a devotional life. It's so much a part of their lives that they don't question it. But to our boy, he had to learn to understand it, to embrace it. It was kind of odd for him at first to witness this, and then he slowly opened up to it, although nothing's been imposed upon him. And I think it's soaking in that kind of influence just through sharing the company of his parents that I think has a positive effect on him. But he keeps a very good balance between what we introduce him to and what his social circles introduce him to. And at the same time, and now at the age of 14, he has a greater understanding of the benefits of, well, maybe you should say that he has a greater understanding of how much, the importance of time and how it is spent and what it should be and what his priorities are and how he should focus them. And this is something that he's grown into over a period of time. With a certain amount of influence from us, but ultimately it's his own person. He has to make up his own mind how to focus his life and to make use of it. And I'd say we'll take the same approach with our younger children. Obviously at this age, 5 and like 17 months, they're soaking up the life their parents lead, and they're very influenced by it from one degree to another. But it's hard to see how that's going to play out right now. All we try and do is to introduce certain ideas, if you like, the notion of devotion, of worship, of a quiet mind, quiet heart, just ideas really that we can speak about or we can represent in our daily lives together.
Why do you consider America an ideal place for you and your family?
Ideal's a strong word. I don't think I think of it in those terms, but it's where we find ourselves. Do we conceive of another place being more appropriate than where we are now? Not really. It seems to me that we found ourselves in California through practice, through wanting to be closer to particular teachers in our lives, and we have access to those teachers where we're currently living. So it helps Ingrid and I focus and stay focused, remain focused, which can only be of benefit to the children. But basically, we could live anywhere in the world. The problem is, can we sustain our focus and interest in our disciplines, which we think are the most important underlying aspect of our lives. If we lose sight of that, then who knows where we'll be led. We want to develop further this aspect of our lives, and to do that, we need to be near a teacher to both inspire the practice itself, to inspire levels of devotion, increasing levels of devotion, because of the kind of world we live in and the kind of activities that we're involved in take us away from that so often. We need a good grounding, and we need assistance in focusing. And I know what it's been like to be without a teacher and without that focus and to work entirely alone with certain disciplines. And ultimately, the practice dries up because there isn't enough to sustain it.
To me, your guitar skills have evolved quite dramatically in the last 10 years. I'm wondering if you can assess the distance traveled.
Well, guitar was always my first instrument. I've never been particularly proficient in any instrument, and still don't consider that I am. So it's a constant evolution. I think that at a certain point, probably around the time of Gone to Earth, when I started making the guitar loops and wanting to explore that kind of ambient qualities with guitar above any other instrument, I sort of delved into it a little bit further, trying to make the most of my limitations by using a variety of different technologies. And I think through that period, and then through following on from Beehive, I spent a lot of time playing with guitar, playing with effects and processes of one kind or another. And at that time I picked up a Steinberger guitar, and that opened up the possibilities for me to a larger extent at that point in time. And so I think the guitar became more and more of a focus after Beehive for me, and I think that I enjoyed being, in terms of being a member of the Raintree Crow setup, but being a guitarist for that group to a certain degree. I mean, I really enjoyed playing guitar at that point in time. I was really enjoying immersing myself in it. Now I've reached a level of proficiency which allows me to, perform solos and vocal accompaniments and so on and so forth. I still turn to other players, more proficient players, for different kinds of performances, different levels of performance. But if I can cover a bass with my own playing, I do. Just because for all its lack of complexity, there is an emotional. I can pinpoint the emotion that I'm looking for, knowing precisely what it is. I can find it in my own playing, and nail it more succinctly than maybe a third party.
I'm wondering what it was like for you to face crowds on the Slowfire tour with just yourself and acoustic guitar.
It's quite a daunting prospect, to be honest. I don't think I could have undertaken that tour at any other point prior to that moment in time. And there's a number of reasons for that. The pleasures of performing live had been revealed to me through working with Robert Fripp. That was, I think, the primary experience taken from that collaboration. Was the pleasure of performing live. And at the same time, I'd come into contact with the teachers we spoke of, and I saw the possibility of doing a solo tour as something of a discipline. To be able to, it's kind of presumptuous of a non-musician to take center stage entirely alone and ask the audience to be engaged. But I'd an increased level of confidence in my role as a vocalist, and so that helped me somewhat. I felt a little more comfortable on stage due to working with Robert, and then I had a spiritual discipline with which to focus my mind on the work and allow me to sit center stage and perform wholeheartedly. And I saw it as something of a spiritual discipline, and by viewing it in that light, I was able to undertake the tour and found it to be enormously rewarding as a result.
Well, you've been vaguely critical about the damage in First Day records lately. Can you be specific about what you found so dissatisfying?
I wasn't overly dissatisfied with the First Day. There are certain albums that maybe you might that aren't entirely necessary. I mean, there's the second album I did with Holger Chukai, and maybe the albums with Robert are the ones that I think aren't entirely necessary in terms of the public's perspective. From my perspective, they were necessary. Yeah, the experience of making the First Day was necessary. I mean, I benefited from the experience enormously, although it was a very difficult album to make, because Robert and I, well, we had our own private crisis that we were going through at that point in time, and Robert was wrapped up with EG and all that was going on there with him, with lawsuits and all the rest of it. And I just left the shores of the UK after waiting for 6 months to getting to the States, and I was at home for 2 weeks with my family prior to being thrown into this project. And I just wasn't prepared for it. I wasn't mentally ready to get involved in recording an album with Robert, and I don't think Robert was all there either. So, but at the same time, there was a lot to be expressed. I'd been through a period of relative, how can I put it, a prolonged period of disquiet, really. I've been through an experience that had been debilitating for a number of years, and I was finally emerging from it, and I found that Robert had created a wonderful context for me to be able to express some of the rather negative feelings that I'd had during that period of time, the anger, the frustration, the anxiety. So, but because I was surfacing from the experience, I could also, there was a resolution to it, so I didn't feel like it was a purely negative experience, it was cathartic. And so not only was the expression of this material a cathartic process for me, the act of creating the work in the studio was somewhat cathartic also. And so it was riddled with difficulties of one kind or another. Robert and I have very different methods of working. Robert is very much of the old school process of capturing a performance live, basically, and that's so far removed from what I'm looking for 9 times out of 10. So we didn't actually work that closely in the studio. I mean, Robert would come in the morning, do a series of performances. I would spend the remainder of the day either editing his performance or working on something of my own, and Robert would come in at the end of the day and say, what do we have, basically. So it wasn't we weren't really close-knit in terms of the creation of the music. And so ultimately, I guess, that, as I say, the album was cathartic for both of us in many ways to be working on it at that point in time, because there was a lot to be expressed. But I don't feel particularly close to the material at this point in time. And maybe that's necessary, if something brings out allows this sort of recovery or renewal to take place, you don't necessarily want to go back and dwell on that material. It was part of a process which allowed a renewal to take place. And that's why I don't stand particularly close to the material. It's not, and I wasn't part of the, I didn't help select the musicians. It was the context of Robert's making, which was unusual for me. And as I said, it worked on one level, and I truly appreciate how it helped me work through certain experiences and how it allowed me to express them. But I just don't feel particularly close to the work now.
You're known as cherishing your solitude, and I'm wondering why isolation from conventional, mass-mediated existence is that valuable to you.
I guess I need that solitude in which to focus on the work that I do as much as anything else. I like to create in isolation. The notion that there's a whole industry out there waiting for another album to be released at this or that moment in time can only be a hindrance to me. I need to isolate myself to such a point that the industry doesn't matter, that none of that will come into play when I'm making a work, and it never does. But that's purely because of the way I've set things up for myself. My immediate environment, all the rest of it. I know how to get the best results from my work, given the right environment in which to work. So I try to create the ultimate setup that allows me to work with that freedom of heart and mind and focus. And I think that sometimes, even just talking like this on a daily basis, which I've been doing for a period of months now, begins to eat away at me. And I realize that I'm repeating myself, not so much in what we're talking about today, mercifully, but a lot of what I've said is just constantly repeating, and I find myself in a rather distraught frame of mind, one that is certainly not creative. And it is just through this unnatural repetition and storytelling, because ultimately the answers become a story that I'm relating or relaying, and not something that I'm expressing as something of myself, because I'm on automatic pilot by that point. And it's strange to be recounting things that have happened to you personally that mean a lot in such a rather automatic manner. You know, you feel removed from your life to some degree because you've told the story so many times. So you become numb to your own existence, which is really strange. So there comes a point where I have to turn all that off, just so that I can feel and relate to my own life on whatever level is necessary for me, you know, and that allows new work to come about. And that's why I keep that distance.
It's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you very much. Appreciated your questions. They were different from the norm.